worked. The ugly face in the mirror. Oh, too many words. Couple. The heavy axe swooped from on high, arcing out and down in front of him, to hit the log at a perfect angle to split it in two, sending both pieces tumbling to the side of the stump. Without even bothering to pick them up, the strong man grabbed another log and set it in place, leaving it rocking atop the stump. The shaky movement hardly mattered, for the axe descended in one swift and fluid motion, and two more halves fell to the side stumps. The stump sides. Another log followed, and then another, and then the woodcutter had to pause and sort out the timber piles, tossing the cut pieces 20 feet to a huge woodpile. The morning air was chill, even more so to the man, for his chiseled body was lathered in sweat, but that hardly seemed to bother him. Indeed, if he had even felt the chill, he didn't show it, just went on chopping with more focus than seemed possible. He was nearly 50 years old, though no one watching him would guess his age at even 40. His muscles were hard, his skin tight, and his eyes shone with the fire of youth. That was his blessing and his curse. Another log, another two halves, and then another and another. On and on throughout the early morning, a rhythmic snapping noise that was nothing out of the ordinary for the 1,003 other hardy folk of Micklin's village, an obscure cluster of cottages on the western frontier of Hans the Bear. A group of rugged and uncouth men inhabited the village, spending 11 months of the year out in the wilderlands, hunting for furs and then traveling back to civilization for 1 month to a great and bawdy party in market. No, ever since this man Bertram Dale, though that was likely an alias, they all knew, much like those used by more than half the men in town, outlaws all, had come to Micklin's village. The rhythmic sound of wood chopping had become the rooster's crow for the place. Every morning in pelting rain, driving snow, winter's cold, or summer's heat, Bertram Dale had been out at his work. He had made himself useful in many ways in addition to cutting the wood for the whole village. He had also become Micklin's village's cook, tailor, and best of all, weaponsmith, showing the huntsmen fabulous techniques for honing their weapons to a fine edge. Curiously, though, Bertram had never shown any interest in hunting, which was easily the most lucrative trade to be found in the region. As time had passed and he had made himself useful to the others, every one of them had offered to take him out and show him how to track and hunt the game of the area. The raccoons, the dangerous wolverines, the otters, the beavers, and the wolves. But Bertram could hear nothing of it. He was content, he said, chopping and cooking and performing his other duties about the village. At first, someone whispered that the man must be afraid to go into the forest, but that talk had quickly faded as each man in turn came to understand part of the truth about this curious newcomer. Bertram understood weaponry better than any of them. He was as strong as any, including Micklin himself, who was at least 100 pounds heavier than Bertram, and he had a grace about his movements that could not be denied. Lately, the whispers had turned from one of derision to curiosity, with most now reasoning that Bertram must have been a soldier in the great demon war of the decade before. Perhaps he had seen some horrors, some whispered, that had driven him out here away from civilized lands. Or perhaps he had deserted his company in battle. Others wondered and was on the run. In any case, Bertram had surely been a godsend of gossip for the often bored folk of Micklin's village. He hardly seemed to care about the whispers and the rumors, just quietly went about his work every day, restocking the woodpile with freshly cut timber after cords had been stacked beside each of the 6 buildings in the village. Bertram paused in his work to watch the huntsman go out this morning and to take a deep drink of water from the pail he had set out by the chopping block, pouring more over his iron-hard torso than he actually got in his mouth. All the huntsmen called out to him as they headed off, with many offerings, as they offered every day to take him along and show him the trade. Bertram politely declined every offer with a smile and a shake of his head. "I can show you good," the last man called. "Inside a month, I'll have you better than half the fools in Micklin's." Again, Bertram only smiled and shook his head, not letting on in the least how perfectly ridiculous he thought those words to be. Within a month, indeed. For this man who called himself Bertram Dale knew that he could out-hunt any man in the village already, and that he could outfight any two of them put together with ease. It wasn't lack of skill that kept him from the forest and the hunt, it was fear. Fear of himself, of what he might become when the smell of blood was thick in his nostrils. How many times, he wondered, had that happened to him over the last few years? How many times had he settled into a new home, always on the outskirts of the civilized lands, only he begun to run again within a short time, a month or two, because that inner demon had freed itself and had slaughtered a villager. As much of the fear of being caught and killed, Bertram hated the killing, hated the blood that indelibly stained his warrior's hands. He had never been a gentleman, had never been afraid of killing his enemies in battle, but this was beyond tolerance. He had killed simple farmers, had killed the wives of simple farmers, had killed even the children of simple farmers. And with each kill had come more self-loathing and an even greater sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Now he was in Micklin's village, a place inhabited only by strong, able-bodied huntsmen. He had found a daily routine that kept him fed and sheltered, and away from the temptations of his inner demons. No, Bertram Dale would not go out on those hunts, where he might smell blood, where he might go into a murderous frenzy, and find himself on the run yet again. How many villages were there on the western borderlands of Hans the Bear? The axe arced down, cleanly splitting another log. He had it all, because he asked them the truth. He had it all cut and piled by mid-morning. He was alone in the village then, and would be until late afternoon, likely. He did a quick circuit of the area to ensure that no one was about, then stripped to his waist in a small square between four of the buildings. He took a deep breath, letting his thoughts drift back across the years and the miles, back to the great stone fortress, because he doesn't love me. Far to the speed and precision that little would ever find its way through to strike him. Every so often he would cut the circle short and snap off a wicked punch, or a stiff-fingered jab in front or to either side, or even with a subtle and sudden twisting step behind him. In his mind's eye he saw his opponents falling before his deadly strikes, and they had indeed fallen to him so many times. Once during his tenure at St. Maribel, the abbey had been attacked by a great force of powries, and he had leaped into the middle of one group, fighting barehanded, dropping the sturdy, bloody-capped dwarves with heavy blows and kicks that stole their breath or precision strikes that jabbed through tender eyes to tear at brain matter, leaving the dwarves twitching on the cold ground. That had been his truest realization of joy, he thought, and his movements increased in tempo and intensity, blocking his strikes, first like a snake, then like a leaping and clawing lion, then like a kicking stork. To any onlooker, the former monk would have seemed a blur of motion, his movements too quick to follow, taut limbs snapping and retracting in the blink of an eye. This was his release, his litany to stay the rage that knew no truth and lasting release. How far he had fallen, how much his world had been shattered. Father Abbot Markward had shown him new heights of gemstone power, had shown him how to engage the power of his favored stone, the tiger's paw, more fully. With that stone, Marcalo de Unero had once been able to transform his arm into the killing paw of a tiger, with Markward's assistance. The transformation had taken on new dimensions, had been complete. But in that mutation, de Unero's body had somehow apparently absorbed the gemstone, the tiger's paw, and now its magical energies were an indelible part of his very being. He was no longer human. He didn't even seem to be aging anymore. He had only come to this realization very recently, for he had previously assumed that his superb physical training was merely giving him the appearance of youth. But now he was 49 years old, with the last decade spent in the wilderness, in harsh training and climate. He had changed in appearance, in complexion, and in the cut of his hair, but the essence of his physical body was still young and strong, so very strong. De Uneros understood the implications. He was no longer truly human. He was the were-tiger now.